So that's the viola part for the Irish Suite by Elliot del Borgo. For this one, it's really broken into three main sections. You have the Kaye dance at the beginning, which has to be more articulate. So that's why you hear separation between all those pulses or the dotted quarter notes. And then you also need to make sure that it's very articulate and clear. And then once you get to the lullaby, instead of it being a dance, it becomes more of a song. So it needs to be a lot more legato, smooth, and connected. So, and then when we get to the Irish washerwoman at the end, it's very much the same as the Kaye dance from before. So more articulate, especially with the eighth notes, which needs to all be in the lower half and very clean and clear. So be aware of the articulation style. And then also, in the first half, we have a lot of double stops. So in order to do your double stops effectively, you don't want to push harder and get a very crunchy sound. You want to make sure you just rock your bow so that you're touching both strings. So it shouldn't really be forced. You just have to rock the bow so you're hitting both strings equally. When you move on to bar 3, that's when we get to those diaquara notes. So you need to have more articulation between those. And then we should probably talk a little bit about how to count in 6/8. So 6/8 is a compound meter. And what I mean by compound meter is it technically means there are 6 beats to measure and we count the 8th note as the beat. So in order to simplify things, we take these meters that are long in beats, like 6/8 or 9/8 or 12/8, and then we divide it so that it's a little easier to count. So if you can divide 6 by 3, you get 2. So you'll get 2 pulses or 2 big beats, and within those you can count your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you won't see somebody up conducting this piece in 6. They won't count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right? They'll just be giving you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2. So it's only 2 beats, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But within those 2 beats, you're counting all of the divisions or all of the 6/8 beats. So with our dotted quarter notes, we know that there's 3/8 notes within each dotted quarter note. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And really, the whole first part is not that challenging with the exception of the double stops. And oftentimes with these double stops, you'll have like open strings. But then when you look at measure 25, we start to get to more complex double stops. So you have like an open G with an E on top. So that would be open G with the E on the D string. And then you go to a B with an open D. So making sure that you get your fingers set quickly, and then that you're making good tunnels so that your fingers aren't touching the next string over. So the rest of it kind of plays itself. Do be careful at measure 17, which is very similar to 41. You have these G sharps, so make sure that you're getting the high 3s nice and high. Right, high 3. And same thing with the C sharp, right? That leads us into measure 25 or 24. And it's exactly the same notes that you see at measure 48. So 17 and 41 are the same. And then we come back to 49, which is the same as 25, yes. And then 57 is very, very much the same as measure 9. So just be aware of the notes and how they change, and then practice carefully. Now, when you get to the lullaby, make sure, so many of you are going to have mutes, and those of you who don't have mutes, we'll have them for you at the first honor orchestra rehearsal. this whole lullaby should be muted. So mutes basically clip onto the bridge and they lessen the vibration. So it changes the sound. It will be softer, but it's just a different color or a different timbre. So we do need to use the mutes. We can't just play soft. It changes the sound of the instrument. So when you listen to the viola without the mute versus with the mute, excuse me, got something caught in my throat. There's a notable difference between the timbre or the sound of the instrument. So we want to make sure that we practice with the mute. If you don't have one, ask your teacher. There are other remedies for using mutes, and I'll make sure your teachers know if you don't have one. The other thing that's written here is it says cantabile, or can't. So if you have can't with a period, that's really short for cantabile, and cantabile means to sing. So this whole section we have to work on vibrato. That's basically what we can do to sing on our instruments. We should use plenty of bow and make it nice and legato, but at the same time we should try and add in vibrato to this whole section. So it starts off fairly simple. We don't want to make things martelé, right? It should all be connected. For instance, the second line, different style, not singingly, right? And do try and use your fourth fingers because you can't really vibrate with the open strings. Now, when you get to measure 72, we have this F sharp going to a C natural, which is very hard to do in this style because we have to basically go from an F sharp to C natural, which is a high 2 to a low 2 with a slur. And we don't want to hear the slide. So to avoid that, you have to practice right at the cusp of the slur. And minimize the slurping sound. Or, this is a little bit more advanced, you can keep your F sharp down and then take your first finger across. So if you play your F sharp, and then take your first finger across to the C, then you won't have that issue. Right? So you will be able to keep a very clear slur. So if you're able to do that, I would highly recommend it. The only thing is, try and keep your hand shape consistent. So the thumb, which is really important, needs to stay still. And then you're going to just move that first finger up on the A string, but keep your thumb where the first finger should be, so that way when you come back to the B natural, that your thumb acts as like a reference point or an anchor, right? Okay, so basically, that's how to achieve that slur there. And then be careful of any of these accidentals. So measure 74, 5, 6, 7, measure 78. We have these C sharps. We need to make sure that the C sharp is nice and high, and it keeps going on measure 79. And then when you get to measure 80, 91, or 81, sorry, then you're going to have your C natural. make sure that C natural goes back to being a regular 3 or a low 3, right? And then continuing on. So this part, just be careful of those accidentals, the high 3s, the F naturals, the low 2s. And then we also have to be careful not to accent when we have a separate bow. So if we look at measure 97.6, measure 96, B, C, D, that D is on an up bow and it's all by itself. So we don't want it to stick out and become like a musical fart. So live up bow instead of where it sticks out. And then you're going to keep your bow on the string for the rest, rest, rest. Same thing for that F sharp, not to overdo the up bow, but still come back to the frog, so it has to be light. To the end of this lullaby, you have to take off the mute. So I want to stagger it. So when you get to that first rehearsal, we'll identify who needs to take off the mute in the first measure, who needs to take off in the second measure, and then that way we can really hit that down bow at the Irish washerwoman with an accent. It'll be nice and loud, and go from that piano to the forte. So once we get to the Irish washerwoman, this last piece, or the last dance, basically works the same way as the first one. You still need to put the same separations as the Kaye dance. Right. Just be aware, once you get to 130, we have more of these double stops that get a little trickier. So like we have an A to a D at 132. And then same thing a couple bars later. Now it's really important that you practice and you try and make your instrument ring. So especially on these double stops. So if it's a little bit out of tune, that's not going to work, nor is that not quite. That's going to ring. So first of all, your instrument needs to be perfectly in tune. If you don't know how to tune your instrument, make sure you talk to your teacher. But I would highly recommend that you get a tuner. You know how to adjust your fine tuners. With the pegs, usually I don't have my middle school students deal with pegs unless they're truly advanced and they know that if you turn it too much, you're going to break the strings. So be careful about tuning with the pegs. Always small motions, and whenever you do tune, make sure you pluck so that you can hear the pitch and then you can identify if you're going too high or too low. Always never go too high, because if you go too high, you're going to pop the string, right? But first and foremost, when dealing with double stops, is you gotta be perfectly in tune. Your open strings have to be in tune. And then when you do set your fingers, those double stops need to ring in tune as well. So violas, we kind of have quite a bit of this. So as you get on to 138, sure that all those ring correctly. And we need to know if it's the top note that moves or if it's the bottom note that moves. So be careful if it's the D is going to an E or the open G is going to an A. So be careful of those kinds of things. And then basically it plays itself out the same style all the way through 166. And then you hop in with some of these tunes after 166. Right? And then just practice those arpeggios, making sure that you can get all those notes going up with the skips and then descending by scale. And then same thing a couple bars later, descending arpeggio. So it's not by scale, but by arpeggios. Right, 174, it's kind of the same thing as what we're doing up here, but now we're adding rhythm to it. Again, same thing with the descending arpeggios. Ascending scale, and then descending arpeggio, sort of. And then 182. That here at 183 is that same arpeggio feel. Make sure that we're very accurate with those notes. I would practice it slowly. And then it's kind of nice the way it's set up. Arpeggios have this funny way about them that generally you'll always see it'll go with like even finger numbers to odd finger numbers. So O to O, those would be even, and then odd would be 3, 1, 3. That kind of feeling, and then you'll see how it plays out in most of your arpeggios. So that one, and then the same thing for the next one. Right, we go from an odd finger, skip down to these even ones. Even odd, odd, even. Right, so just be aware of those arpeggios and work them out carefully. But that's pretty much it when it comes to this Irish suite. Break it down into small chunks. The viola part in this isn't as challenging as some of the other parts or some of the other viola music that we may have. So I would practice the double stops. I would practice the cantabile and work up that vibrato. We didn't really talk much about vibrato, but when you vibrate, generally you want your vibrato to be coming from the arm. Try not to do wrist vibrato, because if we do wrist vibrato, it can be kind of spastic and too fast. Arm vibrato will give you a slower and a more pleasing sound to your vibrato. It may take more effort at first to make sure that you're getting a good arm vibrato, but it's well worth it in the end. So to work on that arm vibrato, first I would have you shift up and down, making sure that the wrist stays pretty much nice and straight, so it doesn't bend in or out, but the hand shape should stay consistent throughout. And then as you get faster and faster, we get smaller and smaller, and we stay around first position where that first finger tape should be. And then we just kind of lock the first finger and the thumb gently, but then we keep the arm moving. And this is going to set you up with the most perfect vibrato you can possibly have. But the hardest thing is to put the bow to it. And I'll see kids do exactly this, where they have this beautiful vibrato, but then they can't move the bow because their bow wants to do the same thing as the other arm is doing. So work carefully and then try and develop a good vibrato, especially for this lullaby section. And then when you finish the Irish washerwoman, just work on those arpeggios. So hopefully this was helpful. Good luck and happy practicing.